he did not fear death.
So were you in D.C. with him at the time he was president?
Yes.
So tell us about that.
Okay. We first met right out of seminary. I was had the opportunity to be the pastor of First Baptist Church of Vienna, Georgia, down South Georgia, 30 miles from Plains. So that's when the whole thing started. I was going to be gone on vacation, and I just picked up the phone and called Jimmy and said, would you come preach for me while I'm gone? And he said, sure, he did. So he did. And so that sort of started it. And then a long story, there are a million stories. Eventually, Linda and I and Andy and Ben moved to Calhoun, Georgia, first when I was pastor of First Baptist Church in Calhoun. As it turned out, serendipitously, Calhoun was kind of a hotbed of Carterism. The president, the governor's oldest son and his new wife were real active at our church. A lot of Carter stuff there.
Connections, right.
And in Vienna, backing up, Jody Powell was fifth or sixth generation in Dooley County, and Jody and I became dear friends. And so all of these kind of pieces began to play together. I had always liked to write, had begun to write for Baptist, and then as Carter was president, from time to time, Jody would call and say, the president or first lady are doing such and such. Give us some ideas. And so I did, of course. I jumped at the chance to do that. But the great opportunity came, for which I'm deeply grateful. He did all of that back and forth in those days. Camp David, the whole milieu of Camp David. And then finally they had a treaty. And I had come across a phrase from a dear friend, Walker Knight, and his phrase was, peace like war is waged. And so I had the bright idea that I would write a speech, nobody ever asked me to do it, that, he could use at the signing of that treaty, send it to a friend. There's no email, none of that kind of stuff in those days. Fax was not invented. And I sent it to just somebody I knew in the White House. And about 3 hours before the event, Jody called and said, you'd better get to a TV because the president is using your speech. Wow. And so that was the trigger that really, long story, took me to the White House.
But that is an amazing story because that is one of the greatest, first of all, one of the greatest speeches he ever gave.
It is. Yeah.
And it's also one of the greatest moments. Not only of his presidency, but of the whole Middle East history.
And it still holds.
Yes, it still holds. As
ragged as the Middle East is now, that treaty still holds.
So after the Carter administration, I was working in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and this was... I was driving to work when I heard the news that Anwar Sadat had been assassinated.
Right, yes.
And I had to pull over. It was one of those moments because he gave his life for making that agreement with Jimmy Carter.
What cost him his life.
Yes.
Also.
Yes, it's just but still it held. Yes. Even through all of that, it held.
And this is another example of Jimmy Carter's integrity. It was not a popular thing to try to get that peace treaty. It was nearly impossible. And then the way he did it, flying back and forth, the press was excoriating him for trying to do that in that kind of, so it all came together. And great story, I have a million stories, but the president and Rosalind came to Calhoun a couple of times. Their oldest, Jack and Judy's oldest son, Jason Carter, was born. I laugh and say I kind of helped him get born. And Baptists don't baptize babies, but we dedicate. So we had a parent-child baby dedication, and President and Mrs. Carter came for that, flew in, big deal of that, and I came to church. And a few months later, I had gotten word that Rosen was coming to visit Jack and Judy there in town. Jack and Judy frequently dropped by our house for Sunday lunch. There were no big places in Calhoun. So without telling my wife what I was thinking, I said, why don't you put a roast in the oven? Well, we did that regularly. And then after church, I saw Jack and Judy and Rosalind off in the corner, kind of buzzing around. And I said, why don't you come to lunch with us at our house? And they said, yeah, we'll do that. So I slipped over to Linda and I said, you better get home. We may have company. And she said, you didn't do that. And I said, I did. But the point of fun point, that was the weekend before Camp David. And Rosalind and I sat at the dining room table for a couple hours, as long as she could, because she drove to Chattanooga and flew from Chattanooga to D.C. to go to Camp David. So yeah, all of those pieces come together.
So were you at the White House when Pope John Paul II visited?
I was.
Wow, that's so great.
I had, chased the rabbit. I had wanted, because I've always kept up with all that.
Right.
All of that's, I love history and the drama and the poetry of all of that. And I was curious to know if the Pope wore red shoes. And so I got in the position. He came through the White House and visited, with the Carters. And then the Truman balcony has steps going down to the south lawn. And I stood there, and yes, the Pope wears red shoes.
Well, everybody needs a pair of red shoes. I don't know about that.
But this Pope does not. Francis does not, so.
Well, it's interesting because a friend of mine, and you may have known her, Candy Stroud is her name, some kind of family event that they were allowed to come while the Pope was there, and she was Catholic.
Okay.
And so her child got a baptism blessing from the Pope.
Wonderful, great.
That's pretty big when you're Catholic, if you can get the Pope to bless your child. So that was a moment that, she remembered forever and ever. And,
sure.
It is, it was just an interesting time because, look, I know you're not completely unaware that there's a lot of people that think that the Carter administration was not a very successful presidency. Of course, he did not win a second term. But what do you say about that? What are your thoughts about the kind of presidency it was?
He is looking better and better and better. The policies that he initiated, most of which were not very popular, Panama Canal, the energy, the whole, really saying we got an energy problem here. We need to get our hearts right. That big speech that he made, and the way he did the hostage thing, it was phenomenal how they worked to get all those people out unharmed. He was an excellent president all the way around. When you put him up against Ronald Reagan, who was Mr. Smooth, Carter did not look good on TV compared to Reagan. He knew a whole lot more about the world than Mr. Reagan did, but it didn't matter. Reagan was very smooth and cordial, and they developed a cordial friendship. Carter knew what he was talking about, and President Carter unfailingly put the American people first.
And he sort of stepped back for a while. I volunteered at the 88 convention in Atlanta. Okay. And as far as I recall, if I recall this correctly.
Interminable speech.
Yes. But also, that was the first one he had attended since he left office. That was the first Democratic convention that Jimmy Carter had attended since he had left office. And I remember because I was down in the kind of belly, because I was one of the drivers. I was volunteering for the Dukakis campaign, and they wanted women drivers with American-made cars, and I had a Chrysler, so I got to drive.
Sure.
So I was down in the belly of that building, and Carter came in with the Secret Service detail and the motorcade, which I'm sure he hated all of that, didn't he?
Yeah.
He hated all that pomp and circumstance, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was necessary. That was the price that you paid. He sat loose to all of that. He really did not need that stuff to feel fulfilled, to be president. When you were around him, there was no doubt that he was president of the United States. There was no doubt about that at all.
Well,
but all of the trappings for him and Rosalind were not that important.
Heard in the audio we played earlier that he said the best decision he ever made was marrying Rosalind Carter.
I'm sure that was.
And so his life was more than the jobs he did.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I've heard him 2 or 3 times. Well, back up and say, Carter never did make the big speeches. I mean, he made thousands of speeches, but the other presidents, immediately Reagan went to Tokyo after he left office for $2 million. Carter refused absolutely to do those big speeches. He said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to trade on the presidency. And then he would say, he wrote 27, 28 books. And he said, I write books because I like to write, and I think I have something to say. And I used the money to take my family on the big Christmas trip. For years and years and years, he took his whole family, all of them that wanted to. And the family kept growing. Divorces and kept growing. So they made some fabulous trips, and the president and Miss Carter paid for all of that. And he said, I paid for that with my book money. He did not have to make the big speeches. And when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, he gave all of that money to the Carter Center, whatever it was, million plus. And the joke was, Jack, his son, said, Dad, divvy up that a little bit with the rest of it. But Carter gave it all to the Carter Center.
Yeah, I don't remember which one of the Carter kids it was, but when I was in school, one of the wives were teaching at Snapfinger Woods Elementary School, which was in DeKalb County. I can't recall which one it was, but she during that time had security detail and things like that,
yes.
because of what she was doing. So we were certainly aware of it. I wasn't old enough. I'm 65, so I did not turn 18 in enough time to vote in 76, so I did not get to vote in 76. My first election was 1980, so I didn't get to vote for him. But I think he was a wonderful Georgian. He brought great credit. Never had a scandal.
No scandal.
He just is one of those folks, and he will be remembered fondly. And this is the time to remember him fondly.
It is. Part of there was many, the 1,000 stories, but over a racial issue, the classic Plains Baptist Church split, and Carter and a lot of his family went out with the new one, and that's when right down the road from the Plains Baptist Church, they created the Maranatha Baptist Church.
Yes.
And small church and so forth. And the members took turns cleaning it on Saturday for church, and the Carters took their turn. They would get the bucket and the mop and the dust and go down there and spend the day cleaning up the church, getting ready for Sunday church.
So he had a big transformation through his time in the Georgia Senate and then running for governor, because he was still kind of classified as a segregationist when he ran for governor, but very quickly after that changed that view. So talk about that a little bit.
At the speech, Andy and I were on the Capitol grounds when Carter made that big speech to say that discrimination and segregation, I forget the exact words, it's over.
Yes.
It's over. And that put him on the cover of Time magazine. This was his passion. He grew up in the little bitty hamlet of Ranger, and his playmates were black kids. And he talks about, I think his favorite was Jim. They went to the movies together. Jim would have to sit in the balcony, and Carter could sit downstairs. But this was what he grew up with, and certainly Miss Lillian treated everybody equally, regardless. So yeah, it was in his bones, Plus, this is Jesus. This was as I've said often, Jimmy Carter got Jesus.
Jimmy, that's a great place to end this. Robert Maddox, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for raising such a great son.
Thank you. I agree with that heartily.
We're going to take a break, and lots more to come.